the Florida man who built a castle out of coral, and what happened inside it. In the southernmost tip of Florida, on a stretch of land where the highway ends and the ocean begins, there is a castle. It is not a medieval fortress transported from Europe. It is not a theme park attraction. It is a hand-built monument made entirely of coral rock, carved by a single man over the course of 28 years. And if you visit it today, the tour guides will tell you a charming story, a love story, a man who built a castle for his beloved, a romantic gesture that became a tourist destination. But the tour guides are leaving something out, something the locals know, something the neighbors whisper about, something that happened inside those coral walls that turned a labor of love into a house of secrets. This is the true story of Coral Castle. And the man who built it may have taken a secret to his grave that science still cannot explain. His name was Edward Leedskalnin. He was born in Latvia in 1887. He was a small man, barely 5 feet tall, weighing just over 100 pounds. He had no formal education beyond the 4th grade. He was not an engineer. He was not a mason. He was a stonecutter with a broken heart. The romantic version of the story goes like this. Edward was engaged to a woman named Agnes. She was the love of his life. On the day before their wedding, she called it off. She said he was too old, too poor, too strange. She left him standing at the altar. Heartbroken, Edward emigrated to America. He eventually settled in Florida. And there, in the humid heat and the mosquito-filled nights, he began to build. He said he was building a castle for his lost love. He said that when it was finished, she would come to live with him. She never came. But Edward kept building for 28 years. And here is where the story stops being romantic and starts being impossible. Coral Castle is not made of small, manageable stones. It is made of massive blocks of coral limestone, some weighing up to 30 tons. That is 60,000 pounds. To put that in perspective, the heaviest block in the Great Pyramid of Giza weighs about 80 tons, and it took thousands of workers to move it. Edward worked alone, at night, by lantern light. He had no heavy machinery, no cranes, no bulldozers. He had a few simple tools: chains, pulleys, a tripod made of wood. And yet, he somehow cut, moved, and positioned over 1,000 tons of coral rock with a precision that modern engineers cannot fully explain. Neighbors tried to watch him work. They were curious. A small Latvian man building a castle by himself was not a common sight in 1920s Florida. But Edward did not like being watched. He worked mostly after sunset. He built walls around his property. If someone approached, he would stop working immediately and wait until they left. A few people claimed to have seen him moving the stones. One neighbor said he saw Edward placing his hands on a massive block and humming. Just humming, a low, strange melody. And then the block began to move. Not with ropes, not with pulleys. It just moved. Another witness, a teenager who hid in the bushes one night, said he saw a 20-ton stone floating in the air while Edward stood below it, his arms raised, as if conducting an invisible orchestra. These accounts are almost certainly exaggerated. Or are they? Here is what we know for certain. In 1936, Edward decided to move his entire castle from Florida City to Homestead, 10 miles away. He hired a truck to haul the smaller stones. But the larger blocks, the ones weighing 15, 20, 30 tons, he moved himself. He loaded them onto the truck alone. He unloaded them alone. He positioned them alone. The truck driver who moved the stones said he was instructed to leave his truck at the site and come back the next day. When he returned, the truck was empty. Edward was standing beside it. The stones were in place. The driver never saw how it was done. How does a 100-pound man lift 30 tons? How does a 4th grade education produce a structure with perfect balance, astronomical alignment, and stone joints so tight that no mortar was ever used and no light passes through them? Edward said he knew the secrets of the pyramids. He said he had discovered how the ancient Egyptians built their monuments. He wrote a series of small pamphlets on magnetism and electricity. They read like the work of a madman. Nonsensical diagrams, strange theories about magnetic currents, nothing that an engineer would recognize as functional. But he also said something else. He said, "I have discovered the secrets of the pyramids. I know how the Egyptians and the ancient builders in Peru, Yucatan, and Asia, with only primitive tools, raised and set in place blocks of stone weighing many tons." And then he said, "The secret is in the magnets." Magnets, a word that sounds like magic to some and nonsense to others. But Coral Castle was built on a specific latitude. The stones are aligned to true north with remarkable precision. There is a sundial that is accurate to within 2 minutes. There is a telescope carved from stone that points directly at Polaris. There is a 9-ton gate that, until it was repaired in the 1980s, could be rotated with the push of a single finger. A single finger. 9 tons. When engineers were called to fix the gate after it stopped working, they discovered it was perfectly balanced on a central pivot point. The balance was so precise that the weight was effectively neutralized. But how did Edward, working alone with hand tools, drill a perfectly straight shaft through 9 tons of solid coral? The drill bit would have needed to be perfectly aligned for the entire length of the bore. Any deviation would have caused the bit to bind or break. Modern engineers needed a laser-guided system to recreate what Edward did with no electricity and no visible tools. Then there is the darker side of the story, the side the tour guides do not mention. Edward was not just a quirky builder. He was a recluse. He was paranoid. He believed that unseen forces were watching him. He built a wall around his property and topped it with jagged coral shards. He kept a shotgun near his bed. He had no close friends. And at the center of Coral Castle, there is a room. A small, square chamber with a single stone chair and a stone bed and no windows. Edward called it his workshop. Others have called it something else. A meditation chamber. A prison. A place where something was kept. Locals whispered that Edward was part of a secret society, that he had learned forbidden knowledge in Europe before coming to America, that his pamphlets on magnetism were a coded language hiding something far more significant, something about anti-gravity, something about levitation, something that certain people would kill to possess. In 1951, Edward checked himself into a hospital. He left a sign on the door of Coral Castle that read, "Going to the hospital." He died 3 days later. Kidney failure, starvation, neglect. He weighed just 80 pounds at the time of his death. He never told anyone his secret. The castle was left to a nephew who sold it to a real estate developer. It became a tourist attraction. Thousands of people visit every year. They take pictures of the stone furniture. They admire the crescent moon carvings. They hear the love story and buy a postcard and drive away satisfied. But the question remains, how did he do it? How did one small man with no tools and no help build something that modern science struggles to explain? Edward Leedskalnin took his answer to the grave, but some say he left clues. In his pamphlets, in the alignment of his stones, in the strange symbols he carved into the coral walls. And some say that on certain nights, when the moon is full and the tourists are gone, and the Florida heat is still and heavy, you can see a light moving inside Coral Castle. A lantern, carried by a small figure who hums a low, sad tune. Still building, still waiting, still keeping his secret safe. Sleep well.